Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course International Studies in Vernacular Architecture. Today we are going to discuss about the concluding lecture of Anthropology of Shelter Unit 1. We started our journey with an understanding of who am I and his relationship with various other factors and how the concept of cultural identity is related to many factors throughout his journey. And similarly, from the lectures of Melissa and Annie, you have understood the materiality of it and how the concepts of anthropology plays an important role in the shelter process. So, as a part of concluding session for this Unit 1, I am going to briefly summarize on various aspects of anthropology, what is anthropology and why it is needed to study in the fields of architecture and especially in the context of vernacular architecture. Now, when you look at this slide, have you ever experienced any kind of differences of variations at any time of your life? You might have been born as a vegetarian, but throughout your journey you might have interacted with various cultures, various people from different caste, different religion, different continent, and they may be having from different food practices, different religious beliefs. The same connotation would have been reflected in a different community in a different manner, and they might have understood in a different manner. For example, many of these Hindu festivals, for example, a harvesting festival of Pongal, usually people don't cook a non-vegetarian in their house, but in many other cultures for their main festivals they cook non-vegetarian, and the way we eat is very different. The manner we eat, whether it is a table manners, whether it is a group, how we sit together and eat on a banana leaf was defined through a particular culture. And similarly, eating without touching the food comes from another culture, and coming with the sacrificing comes from a different culture. So different processes and how they are all defined by each segments of the community is very important. If you go to Bengal in any occasion, a wedding occasion or anything in Bengal, the fish is the most priority. It is one of the, for the marriage occasion, they on the very first morning, they bring this fish to the event, and that's how the ceremony starts. So each of these cultures are originated and their roots come from various historic aspects and their sense of belonging. Like in some of these South Indian cultures, you have this kolam representation, you have these rangolis. Of course, they are very much relevant in other parts in Gujarat and Rajasthan and in the northern parts of India, and they follow certain typical patterns in different parts of the country. For instance, these patterns are very much followed in the South Indian country, shows bit of continuous stretch, and also especially during the Pongal season they have typical patterns which are enclosed with 4 entrances, that is referred as Vaikunta Vakili. It's like they refer to the god's adobe, God Vishnu's adobe, where it has 4 entrances. So like that there are various myths that are depicted in the floral patterns, whether in terms of rangolis, whether in terms of wall decorations, whether in terms of the fields they have, whether in the kind of ornamentation they do, even the fabrics they wear, the colors which they don't and they do wear on certain occasions. This is very typical of particular communities. And in fact, not only about our food habits, not only about our our fabrics, what we wear, but it is also to do our religious belonging, how we actually pray, how we worship our gods. Some of us, we worship as a temple form, as an idealistic form, and whereas in the mosque, the Islamic societies, they pray in the mosque, and the Christians, they have the churches, and even the burial traditions vary from culture to culture. Even not only the birth traditions, but the death traditions also vary from culture to culture. Like even within the Hindu society, there are certain castes which go for the burial traditions, whereas some of them, they actually burnt the dead bodies. So that's how various traditional practices have been evolved in time, and some of them have eventually also changed. For example, these are the temples. This is the Beastvarya temple, which is actually significantly built on in between two ponds. And it also differentiates the society who access from the front side and who access from the rear side. At that point of time, during the Kalachuri times in Ratanpur, that time itself, they actually also defined the access points of these temples. From the anthropological perspective, difference is the essence of the humanity, and difference is an accident of birth, and it should therefore never be the source of hatred or conflict. The answer to difference to respect it. So this was actually John Hume talked about, because we are born with the difference. We are difference is an accident of birth, and so here what we really have to understand here it is, we need to accept it and we need to respect it. So we are born from different family backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds. We are grown up in different cultures. We are grown up in different climatic conditions. We are processed through various genetical processes, and we are grown up in different climatic conditions, and we adapt to different cultural practices, and we are tuned with certain behaviors. We are able to accept certain behaviors, and we will not be able to accept certain behaviors. So this is how it goes back to how, from where you come from, and what you are able to accept and what you are not able to accept. When we talk about the climatic conditions, especially the harsh winter climatic conditions, if you go to the Arctic Circle or the Antarctic Circle where the Eskimos live, and even in the northern parts of Sweden, where my own experiences, where people adapt themselves in winter differently and in summer differently. For instance, the left-hand side photograph is a complete sea which was completely frozen, and then they actually create a passage to walk or to drive on the sea. So they're trying to adapt different ways how to cross over to the different islands, and during the winter how they do, and during the summer how they do. And also they are proposing of various attractive winter cities, concept of attractive winter cities, where their playgrounds, which are meant to play, they are mostly shut down for almost 6 to 8 months. But then how people try to adapt to accept these winter conditions, how they bring various winter sports like skiing, and some of these cultural activities, they bring art into the public places. And another concept is the tourism sector, how a hotel which stays only for a temporary time, maybe during harsh winter times, this ice hotel near Kiruna, it's built only during the winter time, and after that it is completely taken out. So even in the harsh conditions, man was able to adapt himself, and he was able to innovate different ways of living with the harsh conditions. When we talk about the differences, let's start our understanding a difference in a small room where we work, like in a small lab where 3 or 4 researchers or the colleagues working in it, they are not from the same background. They are not from the same professional background either, or they may not be from same ethnic background. One may be from Africa, one may be from Chinese, one may be from India. So anyone, or even within the Indian subcontinent, in my own lab I can see that people coming from south, people coming from north, people coming from west, so people come from abroad. Each of them have their own cultural ways of working. Someone wants to hear music, someone gets disturbed in it. So that happens in every office, what we can see. So some are very sensitive to the sound, some are sensitive to a social way of working. So like that, our understanding of difference can start within a small room itself. So when we look at the scale of these differences, not only at a scale of a room, but when we take about these wider number of samples of people living in a big metropolitan city, how there will be people who are migrants coming from different rural places. There are lower income groups, there are middle income groups, there might be a higher income groups, there might be multi-millionaires and billionaires living in the city. How this diversity has been addressed. So and people living in smaller hamlets, how do their lifestyle is? People living in rural villages, how do their lifestyle is? And people who are living in a tall towers, how do their lifestyle is? So we talk about even a city, we have such kind of differences and we have that kind of variations. And now we consider the globe, the whole world, where Africans are very different from Americans and South Americans are different from North Americans. Similarly, the Asians, if you consider the continent of Asia, the Middle Eastern people are very different, their food habits are different, their religious belonging was different. Whereas in the South Asian cultures, it is very different. You have the Buddhist and Hindu, Jain cultures and also the Islamic cultures and the Christianity as well. So when there are mixed cultures, obviously within, whether in the scale of a small room or to a city or even to a country, not only to a country but to a continent as well. But how do we react or respond to such variations? That is the most important part. So from an anthropological perspective, there are two views which has been talked about. One is the emic view and the etic view. So what the people think about their own culture is an emic, and what an outsider thinks about a culture other than his own is etic. So the term emic refers to what insiders do and grasp about their own culture. It includes people's view of reality and their explanation of why they do and the way they do. Like I myself coming from an Andhra Pradesh state, and I'm coming from a small town which is close to Tamil Nadu. So the way I eat, the way the food items I eat, and the way I dress in my home, the kind of festivals I celebrate, what I perceive is very different, my own culture. But whereas a person coming from Punjab or Haryana and looking at my culture, eating on a banana leaf, or maybe a foreigner coming and seeing us sitting down and eating on a banana leaf, maybe he may feel it a different way. So that is how the difference between the emic view and the etic view. For example, some of the references was given from the textbook of this anthropology, which is of course a school-based textbook, but it is very interesting to see the information that they have provided in this particular anthropology textbook for the 11th class. And in emic view has given some examples. There is a local belief that the nails and hair removed from the body are not to be thrown in the open space because there is a chance of same being used for black magic, using harm to a person. This is a kind of myths which people might have carried over from generations to generations. But the very ethic side of it, maybe throwing nails and hairs carelessly is not hygienic, and it will turn mix up with food materials. There is a hygiene context concern which comes from the ethic perspective. And similarly, in Hindu families, the elders do not allow the coconut peels half open inside the home, saying it is done on the occasion of death. But whereas in the ethic perspective, keeping half of the coconut open will lead to the coconut becoming dry and unfit for use. So these are two basic perspectives of how we understand the societies. So now coming to the definition of this anthropology, it was initially coined by the Greek philosopher Aristotle, and anthropos plus logos, which means anthropos means human and logos means study or science. So Kroeber talks about anthropology as a science of man. So and mainly what is important for a biologist, for a chemist, for a physics person, they need a laboratory, they need a space to work with some solutions, they need a space to measure something, they need to experiment something. But for the anthropologist, the field is a laboratory, the city is a laboratory, a village is a laboratory. It could be any place where peoples and cultures are found. So in fact, in Regina Lim's work, in the work of Philippines and also some of her work in Bhutan, where she have been involved with the community and she used to be with the community, learn from the community, the fisherman's community, and as well as the mountain communities and also the plain communities. Those are how the issues, how are the development issues are related to. How are they rooted from? Are they rooted from internally or externally? And this is a kind of very interesting work of Regina Lim's work, and how the impacts of fishing has been seen in few decades. What are the root causes for it? Similarly, in my own work also, when I been part of these fishing activities, especially in the context of Tamil Nadu, what I learned in this process is initially I went with a kind of a questionnaire approach, which never worked out with working with the local communities, because many of them are illiterates and they were not able to understand, and most of the responses in a very superficial level. But when I started living with them, when I started developing a trust with these communities, interacting with them regularly and roaming around, going to fishing with them, and that actually developed certain trust between and bond between me and communities, myself and the communities. So one of my another colleague from France, he was actually living there in the fisherman house. He started learning Tamil. Sometimes it requires to learn the local language, because you need to understand the deeper understanding of what the community talks about, sense about. Sometimes linguistics plays an important role. So even in my case, I ended up learning Tamil, whatever the villagers were talking about. Gradually, in few months, I was able to understand what the gender issues they are talking about, what the livelihood issues they are talking about. And of course, within the process, I also try to develop some mental maps and other aspects. So similarly in the education, we once for a SAVA conference, what we did was we brought these tribes, Vernacular tribe from the northern part of Andhra Pradesh, and then we asked them to construct these disaster resilient shelters in 3 hours time. So that is where our students were involved learning from the tribes and how they can actually make these bamboo shelters within 3 hours time. So in that way, even the transfer of knowledge, how we can actually learn from these tribes, learn from these communities is very important. And in the process, we also need to unlearn many things what we already know. So when we talk about the major branches of anthropology, so in the biological anthropology, for example, Great Barrier Reef, where certain biological processes are analyzed, whether in terms of algae or fungi, and how these are actually damaged in the current conditions. There are many ways one can look at it. Similarly, the most important part from the architectural perspective is the social cultural anthropology and archaeological anthropology, and of course linguistic anthropology. So let me show you some examples of, for example, you have this Wimbuja healing dance in Malawi, where it talks about certain knowledge on medicinal aspects, how these different cultures practice and how they are passed on from generation to generation. So there is a cultural process where the knowledge is transferred from one generation to another generation. Whereas if you see some of the archaeological evidences, you can see there is a text written here. It says, the pillar is donation of sons of Sagaka, both residents of Patithana. So which means even the decoding the linguistic part of this particular text on an archaeological site in Pitalkhora caves, it actually reveals some information about some other city, some other donor who funded this, construction. So in that way, there is a collaboration between the linguistic understanding of it in the archaeological context and talking about some other family situated in some other city, you know. So in that way it creates certain linkages. Even in the context of Bhimbetka, what we can actually see, these are the sites and the, you know, the works of man, and where how he is interacting with these nature and how he was celebrating his life, you know, what kind of activities he used. It is all captured in these rock paintings, which is actually a World Heritage Site. But you know, some of these evidences actually give certain clues how a particular clan or a particular society or a particular tribal group or a particular families, you know, so how their lifestyle was, how their way of behavior was, you know. So this is where we reflects with the anthropology. So we can actually track back certain transformations that happened with that particular families or particular clans or the particular societies. With one of these prominent example where we talk about the Kumbh Mela, which was recently inscribed in as an intangible cultural heritage by the UNESCO list. So this is one of the huge social congregation which happens either in Allahabad or even in Haridwar. You know, there's a huge congregation which happens, and people from different parts of India come together, and they actually take a dip or they take the holy water from here and they go to their temples. So there's various activities which takes place. But if you look at it, even the Harvard University, they have studied the economic feasibility, you know, the economic aspects of this particular social congregations, you know, like these economic aspects. What are the, how many business ventures it opens up, and how even the Muslim communities are part of many of these Kanvar Yatra. And you know, so in fact there is a communal, there are different societies which serve these people. There is a tourism industry which comes in, which plays an important role. There is also the disaster management committees which plays an important role in it. How the crowd management system, the transport hubs, how they actually provide different facilities for these pilgrims to come and go back to their own places. So like that there is, and what is the expenditure for this? How do administrations look at it? How do the health sector look at it? And not only that, when we look at this kind of congregations, you know, there is a religious perspective in it, and we can also look from an ecological perspective where the Swachhata and Pavitrata aspects could be observed, which means cleanliness and holiness, how they are interrelated to each other and how they influence each other, you know, both in a positive ways and in negative ways, you know, how they are interpreted by different societies. So similarly, the political anthropology, you know, how the politics perceive this whole congregations. Like in this one example actually can talk about many issues in terms of socio-cultural anthropology, because there is an economic perspective in it, there is a political vision in it, you know, there is ecological understanding in it, there is a religious understanding in it. So similarly, when we talk about, there's another branch of medical anthropology where the knowledge and the practices concerning the nature and this universe. For example, we have these Kalavaya ethnic groups in the mountainous regions, and they actually dates back to the pre-Inca period, and like many aspects of these Andean cultures, these Kalavaya practices and values have evolved through the fusion of native and Christian religions. Even these are all represented in the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage, including the Wimbuja healing dance, and how these, whether it is the dance practices, whether it is a knowledge on herbs and the process, you know, they are all concerned with the nature. So how they are transferred from one generation to the another generation. So that is a kind of brief understanding of anthropology and how it has certain interactions with the human and nature, and how humans have intervened with the nature and evolved their identities, and how they transform their understanding to the how they transmitted their understanding towards the next generations. So now I'm going to talk about how it is relevant in architecture. Like I'm going to talk to you a few cases and few aspects how architects have considered the anthropological aspects of certain societies. One of the important cases I would like to bring forward is a tribal museum in Bhopal designed by Revati Kamath and artist Harichandan Bhatti ji. And so in this, I'll just show you the way they conceptualize the galleries of the tribes of Madhya Pradesh. And one of the gallery is oriented towards the spiritual nature of it. One of the galleries is oriented toward the life and the lifestyle of it. Another gallery is more oriented towards their, the myths and the play aspect of it. So this is one of the artifact. Of course, they have exaggerated the scale of it to from the museum perspective. But if you see, there is a myths in the tribal places that there's Bambusa, the goddess Bambusa, the bamboo goddess. What is the story of this bamboo goddess? So basically, there was the story talks about an young girl who was hunted and eaten by her own brothers, and one of the brother was trying to protect her from the rest of these brothers. He loved her immensely and he always tried to save her, but at some point of time he was not able to save her, and he buried the little part of her body, and that's where people believe that the tears have drenched that, and that's actually have grown into a bamboo tree. So that is what they referred as the holy Kandariya Kanya, as a bamboo goddess. So but you see, this whole myth was just a kind of fairy tale which has been told as a stories to their children in the tribal societies. But then some of the anthropologists got all these myths or these tales, and then that has an artist have depicted that form. The woman has been tortured by few people. That kind of expression has been brought by an artist, and then that has been captured within the museum. So in that way, an anthropologist, an artist, and architect, how they closely work together to bring that message of that particular myths which were there in the societies to the present day audience. Similarly, the kind of plays they have and the kind of celebrations they have, so all these galleries were portrayed based on their observations with the society, their narratives which they have collected from the society. So another example which I would like to say in terms of the development anthropology, even anthropology is not just limited to any historical or archaeological or biological conditions, or inquiries. But in the development anthropology, I'll just refer one of the NGO's work, Anhad Foundation by Abhinav and his team. They're doing wonderful work. What they're doing is they're actually tapping down the unknown potential of these rural musicians, and they're actually bringing them into a kind of business, making them as entrepreneurs. So in fact, they are understanding these root causes why this music is not coming to the mainstream. So that is where they are approaching the villagers. They are actually capturing their own talents, and they are actually increasing their monthly incomes, and they are bringing a kind of sense of entrepreneurs. They are connecting these villagers with many other agencies. So in that way, they are able to teach the new generations, and at the same time there are some women empowerments programs has been conducted, and in between, in the music management process, they are trying to reduce the role of the middlemen in this process, so that where the musicians can get a direct benefit of that. So in that way, in the context of music management, so Abhinav have done a wonderful work. Now just to summarize the whole understanding, why do you need anthropology in vernacular architecture studies? Okay, so as we understand that there are lots of information, one maybe at a very deep community rooted, something which is very deeply rooted with the nature. So what we really have to do is, when this, in the context of anthropological studies, we need to connect these dots, various dots. Sometimes they may not be in an organized pattern, they may be in a regular pattern, but we need to connect these dots. It actually provides a holistic understanding on ways to connect nature, people, and place environments in time. So it can also categorizes and classifies certain types of differences. It can help in understanding the diversity of differences and show the futuristic directions to connect them. For example, it could be a small column design and in front of a house, but one can easily understand that how it has connected not only the people in the house and the people going on the street, and also it connects their neighborhood. And so if someone is today in the Pongal time, they are not able to see this particular column in front of their house, immediately the neighbors think, is they well, are they feeling well, and they used to inquire, how are you feeling. But in present context, when we moved on from individual house concepts to the apartments complex and high rise buildings, today even the next generations, they will not be aware of these kind of arts, the floral designs, how actually these were connecting the people. So this is something, even with a small design focus of this column design, one can investigate how a society have transformed, the role of this column in the transformation of the societies and their interactions. That also could be studied. So in that way, I'd like to end this session about the anthropology of shelter. Thank you.